users, as Harry said, I think a lot of people, as I've seen particularly in the South, call them the big dogs. And the big dogs eat first and the big dogs eat last, a lot of people believe. Those of us who had to represent the little dogs don't necessarily believe it has to be that way. And I want to explain to you some of the things that have changed on that. So, at any rate, let me get into some of these issues as I have seen them. When the smoke cleared today, this is what the landscape looks like out of all those bills that I mentioned. We had, let's start with New England, the high-cost part of the country where we have the nuclear power plants, which are interestingly closed down, the 3 Millstone units. The Connecticut Yankee unit has been closed permanently. There's talk about closing Maine Yankee. The legislature in Vermont suggested in their restructuring closing Vermont Yankee. So there's a huge battle. I think what made those New Hampshire regulators kind of surly was they were still getting rate increases for the Seabrook plant a couple years ago. They had already bankrupted. It was the first utility bankruptcy in the history of the United States when you look at the law that occurred in New Hampshire, and it was coming out of that and increases year after year that caused their concern about high rates. So this is a very high rate area. The one pamphlet that's in the Protect Michigan packet that's got the color charts, a beautiful example of the rate disparity. So they're paying higher rates, the average consumer in that part of the country. First state out of the box really wasn't California. It was New Hampshire. And they passed a bill, and then Rhode Island did, which is this very small state. And then we go out to the West Coast, and we had California. And California happened last August. And as we get in, I'm going to go into each of these regions. I want to talk about kind of the dynamics of what happened. There was a exit fee law passed in Alabama, which Harry described what exit fees are. This is where the industrial users who were promoting retail access got rolled by the Southern Company and kind of served notice that all across that part of the South that the industrial users were going to have a hard time persuading legislatures to go to retail access. Then in Pennsylvania, and this is an interesting case, a bill that passed the House that dealt with regulating taxi cabs went into a Senate committee, passed the Senate, and with 4 or 5 legislative days left in a lame duck session after the election in November, an entire gigantic restructuring law was put into the taxi cab bill. And Pennsylvania became the 4th state to enact restructuring. Now, I say all that because a Senator Fumo from Philadelphia, I don't know if that rhymes or not, but he is contesting this bill as having illegally passed under the Constitution of Pennsylvania in terms of how fast it happened. It was drafted in a kind of a closed-door session. The consumer advocate, Sonny Popowski, a good friend of mine, signed on to it, but some other groups were not inside when the deal was cut. And so when I say you got to watch where the train is moving, this is a perfect example of what can happen in a major state. And even in California, the law was largely drafted by 6 legislators. And that is where public financing or securitization was first put forth. Now, what has happened so far this year? This year has been interesting. This month, we see Maine join this group. But we also see for the first time what are considered to be low-cost states. I said initially there were only high-cost states, and those are Oklahoma and Montana. And securitization is in the Montana law. The next law that we see that may be passing as we're talking right now is in Nevada. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. So you can see how the issue is growing. We had 4 states last year. Already at this hour, we have 3 and possibly a 4th one that have done major restructuring. Now, this chart is not in the handout, but when Harry said, and I say that this follows high-cost states, let me show you. When this first started, this was a perfect correlation. Here's restructuring activity along the bottom. These are where plans were adopted. This is the infamous Blue Book. Here is ordering plans, and here's no activity. Now you can see the kilowatt hour cost. So this is This side of the chart is highest activity. This is a NERA chart that was given in a conference in Tallahassee, in their first restructuring conference that the PSC had that I was at. And I thought it really kind of says it all. Here's Massachusetts, Vermont, here's these New England states. Here's Pennsylvania, kind of right below the first tier here. And you can see here's Illinois, here's Michigan, here's Ohio. These are kind of the low-cost states that are bringing up the rear, and you'll see this. Now, what has happened now for the first time in the last couple months is we have seen Montana, here's Oklahoma, and Montana break out of the pack. We have seen low-cost states. One of the fears in the low-cost states is the fear that they are producing low-cost power that will be attracted to a large sucking sound, like California, for example, or it could be Chicago, and that their rates will go up. And this is a real live fear. When I've been to Kentucky and in Indiana, which are low-cost states, burning coal, they have a huge fear that the market is going to reach an equilibrium, I think is the economic term. So I wanted to put that up here because we're now seeing this move outside of those. Now, to me, the biggest untold story, and again, Harry mentioned special contracts, the big dogs. The lobbyist for Elcon, John Anderson, who has been on all of these programs, he will say rates should, we should have retail wheeling. He was in here, he's everywhere. I think you have to give him a lot of credit. He's probably the happiest man around. And what he says essentially is, now the industrials are saying everyone, including residential, commercial, should get lower rates. But the reality is that at